Well, tonight, the parable that we're going to look at, and we'll see it in a minute, but it's the parable of the wicked tenants. And this parable is kind of controversial in the Bible with scholars. Some scholars don't even attribute this to Jesus. Some say it's allegorical, and that is the what you will find mostly traditionally. But when I was going over it and when I read it, this just hit me about what price violence. And I just thought it would be appropriate because of the state of affairs of the world today. So, what price violence? All right. And we just go back just for a little review and remember, Jesus' purpose for telling these stories was to proclaim God's kingdom to everyone. He brought the image of God as Father to a new meaning. God was a loving presence now active in the world in spite of the violence and inharmonious conditions. And this is something we really want to pay attention to, because although Jesus was addressing 2,000 years ago, and he was addressing the Jewish people of the time, this message is for everyone, and it is for us. So when we read the parable, it's not long, of course. Just see where your reactions go, because that's kind of what happened to me. All right. The parable of the wicked tenants. George.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Matthew 21, 33, 36. Here another parable. There was a man who was a householder, and he planted a vineyard and fenced it. And he dug it, wine press, and built a tower. Then he leased it to laborers and went away on a journey. And when the fruit season was at hand, he sent his servants to the laborers, that they might send him some of the fruits of his vineyard. And the laborers seized his servants, and some were beaten, some were stoned, and some were killed. Again, he sent other servants, many more than the first, and they did likewise to them.
Okay, now this doesn't sound like Jesus, like the Jesus that we know. But as we move on, you will see okay. As we move on with it, you will see where we can fold in some of the principles of the kingdom, even though Jesus is putting it this way rather graphically. Okay. Now, a little cultural background. Okay. The man built a vineyard, and so we have a kind of a makeshift picture of a vineyard, and the significance being the tower there in the background, which is the tower here on the right. The tower was necessary to keep watch that people did not come in and steal their produce or ruin their vineyards. Okay. And then says that he created wine presses. Well, this is an example of a wine press. Now, just know that, yes, back in those days, they did stomp on grapes, and it wasn't, you know, whenever I hear or read or envision people stomping on grapes, I just think of Lucy. I love Lucy. But so they did stomp on the grapes with their feet. And you see the picture there, you can probably see, I don't know, ropes hanging down, and they held onto the ropes and they stomped the grapes. So just a little fun pictures here of what they were talking about. So, rich Near Eastern landlords plant vineyards, build towers, and erect wine presses, and then lease them to others. The lessee agrees to take care of the vineyard, prune and cultivate it, and give 1/3 of the fruit to its owner. Some owners, although they have leased their vineyards, expect produce from them free of charge. Workers who desire to retain the goodwill of the owners during the season send baskets of grapes and other fruits to them. And when the workers failed to do this, failed to send the grapes to the owner doesn't hesitate to send his servants to the vineyard to pick as much fruit as they wish. And this is the key here, without the permission of the husbandman. So you see a situation here which is not uncommon in our world either. You've got controversy, okay, over does the owner deserve to have these grapes when the laborers are the ones that did it? And so that creates a problem. So the laborers did not send grapes to the owner, and the laborers felt that they had cultivated the land and grew the grapes, and the owner was not entitled to any of the fruit. The owner sent servants to pick the grapes for the owner, and the laborers resorted to violence. The laborers were angry because they did not want to give their work, so to speak. They did not want to give that to the owner because they leased the land and they didn't think that was right. So go ahead, George.
At last he sent his son to them, saying, they might feel ashamed before my son. But when the laborers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and retain his inheritance. So they seized him and took him out of the vineyard and killed him.
Okay, let me just go back here. Okay, so I didn't emphasize the fact that the laborers just took the servants, beat them, and tossed them out. And so the servants would go back to the owner and say, well, we didn't get anything, I was beaten. All right. Just wanted to make that sure. And the owner kept sending his servants back to get stuff. And we'll talk about that later. Okay, so the owner said, well, maybe they would have respect for my son. Not a good thought on the part of the owner. And so the laborers knew the law, and it was the law that if a man had no son or offspring, then the land would revert to the lessees. And so we had a little bit of greed going here. And I found this quote. I thought it was, this is not scripture, okay? But I just found this quote when I was reading. It was kind of like part of the explanation of scriptural passage. But what we have is greed here, and a man's greed is like a snake that wants to swallow an elephant. And that just kind of describes what the laborers were thinking. And that they would get the vineyard. All right, now the next part, and that, okay.
When therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those laborers? They said to him, he will destroy them savagely, and lease his vineyard to the other laborers, who will give him fruits in their seasons.
Okay, now again, this might not sound like Jesus because it's pretty graphic in talking about, but the whole point in my mind here is violence leads to more violence. Okay, the greed and the anger of the laborers, and they're trying to hold up their ideals or whatever they believed. So they beat the servants, and then they killed the son, thinking, okay, we're going to come out wealthy, whatever. So the main lesson here, and certainly is a teaching of Jesus, is that violence leads to more violence. Now, there's a some of the laborers, okay, were humble and generous men, and they did not raise any interference or any objection. So if the owner came back he would destroy all those laborers that were against him, but we would have the humble and the meek there, and they would inherit the land, inherit the earth, reminiscent of the Beatitudes, where the meek will inherit the earth. So all right, and I'll just take you to this other scripture, and I have some more, just to drive home the point that ignorance and anger and wrath, it leads to violence, and of course that is not what Jesus wanted. So Matthew 26:52. All right, then Jesus said to him, return the sword to its place, for all who take swords will die by swords. All right, now another reason that I chose this parable is because Dr. Lamsa was very, very much devoted to the teachings of Jesus and to this idea of meekness and whatever, because that is what the kingdom was all about. And that's Jesus was trying to tell these people. And it is spiritual, but he was trying to tell them that, you know, this is Dr. Lumps's quote here. Force is not the remedy with which to heal the ills of the world. Force must constantly be reinforced, and what must constantly be reinforced is weak. Just as there is no limit to the boundaries of the universe, so there is no limit to man's imagination for power and acquisition of material things. And in this case, the laborers, all right, they did not care about life in general. They did not care about the servants, and probably back then, some of the other scriptures and novels use the word slave, and they had no compassion, no anything, when they just beat up the servants and whatnot. And then when the owner sent his son, there's that is greed, anger, and again, no compassion and concern only for themselves, except they were kind of stupid, weren't they? Anyway, so, and again, violence leads to more violence. All right, and so anger. Psalm 37:8. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself in any wise to do evil, for evildoers shall be cut off, but those who trust in the Lord shall inherit the earth. A psalm from the Old Testament, but a lesson about the kingdom from Jesus. And let's not forget that Jesus taught from the Torah, which is the Old Testament. All right, and then we go to James 1:19, which is a very famous, well used scripture. Therefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, and slow to speak, and slow to anger. And we can't forget this one of love your neighbor, but in addition, I say to you, love your enemies, bless anyone who curses you, do good to anyone who hates you, and pray for those who carry you away by force and persecute you. This is a hotly debated, I'm sure you know, well, how do I love my enemy? And I just don't know. And I don't think that, I'm not saying me, but you know, highly debated. But one day maybe we'll do a whole session on how to love your enemy. Okay. And then we have the other, okay, we have the turn the other cheek and meekness. Matthew 5:38, you have heard that it is said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you that you should not resist evil, but whoever strikes you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, before I just read this little passage, turn the other cheek does not mean that you should not defend yourself. And that's a misnomer about turning the other cheek. If you are attacked in any way, and that goes for verbal attacks also. Okay, and if it's just a matter of somebody takes a swing at you or somebody says something and you feel like you want to just knock them down, it just means try to not react so that more violence will occur. And a lot of times it's, just shut up and don't argue back and things like that. So just make sure that we understand what that is. But again, it's the idea of resisting violence, resisting building a situation up to where there will be violence. And so the Christian gospel, the gospel of meekness, is not only practical, but is in fact the only weapon with which to fight and conquer the forces of evil. But it cannot work for the unfaithful, those who are unwilling or afraid to try it. Just a little blurb here about it. Okay. And finally, a short lesson tonight, but world peace will only manifest fully when the majority of its leaders and inhabitants discover the true peace of God's counsel within themselves. We must realize that force and violence will never bring the harmony we need. War is only a temporary fix. Legal force cannot hold back violence forever. Okay, so I'm just going to go through these. Thank you for your contributions. And I just added this in case we have a Facebook group called Aramaic Pathways Group. And of course, the recordings of all these videos are on YouTube. And most of you are on our email list, so I don't have to mention that, but I just put it in here because people watch this as a recording so that they know. Now, all right. So I hope all of you kind of just let the let your actions and your emotions loose when we read this parable, because I don't know, I just found it very interesting, and I just and I think about all of the violence, the wars, the killing people, and I just have to, I always have this thought that Jesus failed, but it's not that he failed, but the idea of his teachings and his spiritual teachings and the principles of nonviolence teachings, which have carried through from Jesus' time, they the nonviolence through Tolstoy, Gandhi saved a whole nation with not one bit of violence. Gandhi and Martin Luther King all used those principles. So anyway, I just thought about that, and I thought about our world today, and so I will entertain your thoughts about this situation, because to me it's just, it goes on like this. But we don't, we are very blessed and fortunate in our country that well, I want to say that we don't kill people. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily so, but we're, our government, where we are a lot more nonviolent, and we would not have maybe killed or maybe beat up some of the servants if it was the laborers today, maybe, but we do have in our country that killing is not the thing to do that, and I think we got some work to do. But anyway, so I'll just entertain your thoughts, what you thought about when we were reading the parable, and just things in general.